Greetings, my name is Dennis Starkovich and I'm the creator of IdeaGram. We are all familiar with a written outline as shown here. It is organized from top to bottom and the concepts are listed one line at a time in a linear progression. As you are about to see, making a chart in the IdeaGram format presents the information in a dramatically different fashion. In this video, we are going to talk about a concept described by Hazrat Inayat Khan by the name of unlearning. As with many other Khan writings, I prepared an ideagram of this article for the purpose of obtaining a deeper understanding of the subject and in the hope of sharing it with others. We are going to take a look at the chart and discuss the process of unlearning. However, before we do that, let's first discuss what it means to learn something.
Learning is a process of acquiring new or modifying existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences. We start learning right from birth, and if we are fortunate, learning continues throughout our lives. Some things are learned immediately, and some through knowledge that accumulates from repeated experience. Sensory sensations like sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing all play a part in learning. Those sensations lead to emotions and thoughts.
And then these thoughts and emotions become embedded in our consciousness as they help create a sense of personal self with a physical history. This internal reflection is often forward or backward looking and not in the present moment. But who or what is the deeper presence that underlies and observes our consciousness and awareness? Unfortunately, too many continuous thoughts obscure our self-identification with this underlying presence.
Unlearning is an extension of the learning process, and it usually takes place later in life. There are multiple aspects to the process of unlearning, and they are generally cumulative. Unlearning is a process of cultivating and expanding upon what one has learned, letting go of what became fixed in the mind, and seeing the multiple ways of looking at and understanding things. We're not talking about forgetting what was learned. We are talking about viewing and understanding things from many different points of view. The goal of unlearning is to identify with who we are beyond what we understand to be ourselves. There is a stillness underlying our presence, even as we form thoughts and materialize ideas. In the diagram here, you will see that the fourth step in unlearning is to free oneself from a form and have a sense of the abstract. This is one of the far-reaching goals of the unlearning process.
There is a fifth step, which is to repose one's mind. Simple as it may seem, very few people know how to rest the mind, and how wonderful that is in itself. In truth, this is the secret to inner peace and equanimity, learning how to rest the mind.
Now you may ask, is unlearning forgetting all that one learns? No, not at all. That is not necessary. Unlearning is to be able to say with reason, with logic, something that is contrary to what you know or believe. From that point forward, you may begin to see the difference between knowledge and understanding. When you are accustomed to say, this is wrong, that is right, this is good, and that is bad, if you use the opposite words for each, with reason and with logic, naturally you have unlearned what you had once learned or had fixed in your mind. It is after this that the realization of truth begins, because when the mind is not fixed, It is then that one becomes alive. So, how do you unlearn something? Looking at the chart, the first step is to start by looking at another person's point of view and try to understand how they came to their conclusion. You're going to move beyond what has been ingrained in your understanding of the subject and open yourself up to viewing the subject from the other side. In other words, you will become the other side of the viewpoint. Next, expand that process and try to understand the many different points of view related to the initial subject. Suddenly, your perspective widens to include a variety of angles from which to view a subject, problem, or idea. Step 2 is about looking at opposites. This is about being able to see opposite viewpoints at play beyond where you started. Opposites which have in the past blocked your thought process are no longer a barrier. In doing so, one can begin to identify with what he or she is and or what they are not. Opposites, by their very definition, can often block our thought process. An example, like good and evil, seems pretty straightforward. Something is either good or it is evil. However, ask yourself, is there any good in evil, or is there any evil in good? It is a difficult task at first, but once one has accomplished this, one can see that there can be an inherent goodness in evil, and likewise an inherent evil in goodness. At the very least, they do not and cannot exist in a vacuum. There is no goodness without evil, and there is no evil without goodness. Suddenly, two opposites are perceived and seen much differently. Take, for instance, a loss or a gain. Again, they are perceived as two completely different things. However, can there be any gain in a loss or any loss in a gain? Here's an example.
One time, when teaching the subject of unlearning to a group of 8th graders, one boy, a bit distracted and boisterous as it were, couldn't understand how something could be both good and evil. He was sitting to my immediate left, so I pretended to hit him with my left elbow. That got his immediate attention. I asked him what he would have done if I would have followed through and hit him. He said, "I'd hit you back." I then asked him, what if I was doing that to get his attention, and that a bus was coming right at him, and I did it to save his life? He thought for a minute and said, "Well, then I would thank you." In that instant, he understood how the same action could sometimes be good and sometimes evil.
Let's keep going. Is my enemy actually a friend, or is my friend actually an enemy? It is an exercise in contradicting what we already know or believe, and, in the process, becoming wiser. Okay, now let's look at step 3 of the chart. Identify oneself with what one is not. This is a bit of an abstract idea to conceptualize, so to help demonstrate the concept, Hazrat Khan told 3 stories, each representing a different way that a person could identify with something that they are not. The first story is about mental transformation that is accomplished through meditation. The second story is about a person who can't accept the idea of being cured of an illness because they identify with being sick. And the third story is how a person holds the thought that they are unfortunate. Identification with that thought creates the misfortune that they experience. In the first story, Khan gives an example from an Indian sage that the sage used to share about a teacher, a young man, and a cow.
The young man asked, "Mother, what is the best occupation?" Mother replied, Let's see. That's a good question, son. I am not sure. However, others before you, when searching for answers in life, they went in search of God. The young man asked, "Where do I find God, Mother?" Mother replied, "They say that if one goes into the solitude of the forest, that is where you will find God." So the young man went and lived a life of patience and solitude in the forest by his home, only coming out once or twice to see his mother. One time his patience was exhausted, his heart broken. He was disappointed in not seeing God. His mother sent him back with stronger advice. After his third visit, he said, "Now, Mother, I have been there a long time." She said, "Yes, now I think you are ready to go to a teacher." So the young man went to study under the local teacher, who had many students. Each student had their very own private room where every day they were sent to meditate. The teacher asked the boy, "Is there anything you love in this world?" The young man thought for a while and said, "I love our family cow." The teacher then said, "Then go to your room and meditate on the cow." So the young man did just that, and then 15 minutes passed, then a half hour, then an hour. So finally, curious, the teacher went and knocked on the door. He waited, and there was no answer. So he opened the door and saw the young man sitting cross-legged, deep in his meditation. The teacher called him by name, and the young man answered in the sound of a cow. Moo, moo. By this time, all the other students gathered around to witness this strange sound coming from the room. The teacher asked the young man once again to come out of the room. "Come out." The young man replied, "My horns are too large to pass through the door." The teacher paused and thought for a moment, and then a smile crossed his face. He then looked at all the other students, and he said, "Pay attention, students. You all went into your rooms and meditated on God, but you still don't know where He is. This boy went into his room and meditated on his cow, and now he has lost his identity, and he has become the cow. He has identified himself with the object he was meditating on."
All the difficulty we experience in life is due to our inability to change a false conception. As the story demonstrates, someone in deep meditation can actually alter one's perception of themselves. One may begin to ask oneself, who am I? Am I this body? Am I this mind? Who or what is observing the thoughts going on throughout my mind? Concentration, meditation, and contemplation all lead to a deeper understanding of oneself and the world. So what the young man was able to accomplish by using deep meditation was to lose his identity for that moment and become the cow. By leaving one's identity behind and taking on the identity of the cow, he identified with something that he was not. In the next story, Khan tells about his experience helping a person achieve a cure up to a point.
Khan was trying to help a person who was ill with rheumatism for over 20 years. This woman was in bed. She could not move her joints. He went to her and gave her instructions. Khan said to her, "Now you will do this and I will come again in 2 weeks' time." After 2 weeks passed, Khan returned and she had already begun to move her joints. Khan said, "In 6 weeks, I will come back again." In 6 weeks, she got up from bed and had still greater hope of being cured. Nevertheless, her patience was not as great as it should have been. One day she just was laying in bed and thought, "I can never be cured." Khan said the moment that she had that thought, she went back to the same condition because she identified with being a sick person. For her to see her own well-being was impossible. She could not imagine that she would ever be well again. She could not believe that her joints were moving. She could not believe it.
People can be well in their bodies, but not in their minds. Very often they hold on to an illness which, for all intents and purposes, they could get rid of. It is all too common for many people with health problems to not achieve a healthy state because they have adapted to the condition of their illness. Khan's third example relates how a person manages to create their own misery and misfortune by dwelling on the thought that they are doomed to misfortune. Khan says the same thing happens with misery. People who are conscious of misery, well, they attract miseries. They are their own misery. It is not that misfortune is interested in them, but that they are interested in misfortune. Misfortune does not choose people. People choose misfortune. They hold that thought, and that thought becomes their own. When a person is convinced that he's going downward, he goes downward. His thought is helping him to sink. It is interesting to note that these three examples also illustrate the point of the second step regarding opposites. It can be seen that there are both positive and negative aspects to identifying with what one is not. With that thought in mind, let's look at the second part of step number 3. It is a tradition in the East that students will identify with a spiritual teacher. By following and emulating the teacher, the student gains the teacher's knowledge, inspiration, and power. As time goes by, these things become a heritage that is gained by the student. This heritage represents what is known as the lineage or tradition that has been passed down for generations, often as an oral tradition. But more than a tradition, it is a life experience that is set in motion by identification with another person. The student concentrates to forget his or herself and go deep into the subject of concentration, and in this case, it is the teacher. In the West, many of us learn by identifying and studying with someone we look up to and respect. A simple analogy would be for a beginning guitar player to start by emulating a particular guitar player that they look up to or admire until they have evolved their own sound that more represents their image, tastes, and ideas. When we identify with something or someone else, we start the process of cleansing the mind. By identifying with a spiritual teacher or mentor, we gain knowledge and inspiration from this new information, which in turn we may one day pass on to others. It is a shared heritage for the benefit of many with whom we subsequently come into contact. Looking at step number 4, free oneself from a form. This fourth step brings us back to our introductory comments regarding the benefit of learning to identify with the stillness that underlies our mentality and consciousness. This step endeavors to help us move beyond the many thoughts that busily occupy our mind and take us to a place of peace. Imagine for a moment that you could free yourself from form. Well, what exactly does that mean? Everything we think about suggests a form to the mind's eye. For example, when we think about fairies, spirits, or angels, we immediately conjure up an image of some sort to match our internal understanding or perspective. Even the subject of God often has an abstract image in our mind. So too the idea of spirit. This is human, and it has been learned from birth. It is likely part of our collective unconscious. The fourth step will require significant effort and is somewhat difficult to achieve. It is, however, a gradual process that can develop with practice. It may be approached in a number of ways. For example, concentrating on a particular sound can help take the mind off a concrete thought or form. Likewise, concentrating on the breath can take one to a place of calm and away from repetitive thoughts. In a similar fashion, with patience and concentration, one can arrive at the place of stillness that exists in the momentary gap between the ever-recurring patterns of thought that pass through our mind. The goal is to be able to think of ideas, things, or concepts without inherent form, to be open to the abstract of an idea without form. This is an extremely difficult challenge to accomplish, but is well worth the effort. Interestingly, in another of Hazrat Khan's narratives, he adds a fifth step, which is to be able to repose or relax one's mind. Khan says that as simple as it may seem, very few know the resting of the mind and how wonderful it is in and of itself. The first step, the relaxation of the body, is to relax one's muscular and nervous system at will. Then the mind is automatically refreshed. This assists a person to cast away anxiety, worries, doubts, and fears by the power of will, putting oneself in a restful state. Khan notes that this can be accomplished by the help of proper breathing. Khan also notes in this additional narrative about unlearning that a great magnetism is produced by having stilled and purified the mind. The lack of a stilled and purified mind causes a lack of magnetism. Such people become a source of unrest for others as well as for themselves. And they attract little because the power of attraction is lost. Everyone is tired by their presence, and their atmosphere causes uneasiness and discomfort. They are a burden to themselves and to others.
The ultimate goal of unlearning is that once the mind has been purified, then one is in a position to cultivate the heart quality. That is what ultimately leads to spiritual attainment. In Hazrat Khan's words, the mind is the surface of the heart, and the heart is the depth of the mind. I'd like to share a few more ideas and experiences of the IdeaGram process. It is an outgrowth of what people have done for many years, making plans, schedules, and charts, generally of physical construction projects or similar project planning efforts. These charts told a story, but usually a story of how to do or accomplish something. As the concept of IdeaGram evolved, I began to use a format to convey information. Breaking down and illustrating complex subjects is where the concept of IdeaGram shines. It creates a fresh and engaging way to share information. Here is a real-life example of how helpful creating and sharing an IdeaGram can be.
A few years ago, when I was teaching Shakespeare to my special needs class, the children were having a hard time understanding who was with who and what the flow of the story was. So Dennis and I had been talking about the IdeaGram, and he made one up for me, and I showed it to the class. And the kids were able to have this visual aid to help them understand the play. And when it came to the live presentation of the play that was put on, the children in my class understood it better than all the other 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in the school. It was really fun to see them being able to interact with the play and understand it.
Here is the chart I prepared for Kristan on Shakespeare's play, The Twelfth Night. Let's look at the logic and ideas presented within the chart. You can see the play starts with a shipwreck, and we can follow the progression of events that Viola experiences as the story unfolds. Notice how Viola's twin brother's timeline parallels her part of the story. IdeaGram allows for multiple levels of information to coincide with one another. What distinguishes IdeaGram from other techniques is the ability to visually display and align the plot and highlights as they overlap in the course of the story.
I wish that I had known how to do these charts when I was in high school and college, because I think it would have made studying for a test a lot easier, understanding some complicated content a lot easier. I think it's a great way. I think it should be part of the curriculum, being taught how to do these in like a critical thinking class or something like that. I think it just makes everything so much easier to understand. You get through the fluff, you take it out.
The beauty and artistry of IdeaGram is that not only does it cover the main plot of the story, it also carefully outlines the subplots and can reflect any questions that arise. It condenses a multi-level narrative into an easy-to-follow outline. Because it is a visual representation that informatively links concepts, timelines, and ideas within a narrative, the charted material is clearly illustrated. It is also interesting to realize that if the story is not well told and logical, the chart will illuminate any discrepancies. An ideagram is easily and legibly read from left to right, top to bottom, item by item. The original narrative is shown in a format that can be shared and even added to by others. We hope this presentation has helped you to not only understand the concept of unlearning, but to also gain a deeper appreciation of why we call IdeaGram the alchemy and artistry of ideas. Please feel free to share this video with others. Thank you for watching.